They kept him in the basement for 18 years. Then they put him in a cart and threw him off a cliff into a poisonous mist. They thought he was cursed. They thought he was dead. There was one thing they didn't know. Inside that body now lived a man who had spent 30 years concocting poisons in a laboratory. The first thing he feels is pain, sharp pain, as if someone had poured molten lead straight into his veins. His eyes open on their own, wooden slats above his head, straw beneath his back, iron on his wrists. The cart jolts over the rocks, and every jolt hits his ribs so hard he wants to howl. His throat produces only a rasp. The body is foreign. Skinny arms, black hair sticks to my face. My skin is pale, almost blue. And beneath the skin, veins. Black. As if someone had pumped ink in there. I turn my head. Through the bars, I can see a wall, gray, rising hundreds of meters into the sky. It recedes into the distance. So they're taking me away, beyond the wall, to a place from which no one returns. The driver turns around, a dirty face, a crooked grin. He shouts something about the Sixth Prince and demons. He cackles. He kicks the brake. The cart rolls downhill, faster, even faster. The bars rattle. Straw flies into his face. The last thing he sees before falling is a purple mist below, thick as jelly. The cart crashes into it, and the world fades. He woke up to a smell, sweetish, with a hint of bitterness. Almonds. Daniel Shin knows that smell. Cyanide. The concentration is low, otherwise he wouldn't be able to think. His brain is on autopilot. Just like back in the lab when the flask of neurotoxin broke and he had 4 seconds to make a decision. His body lies amid the wreckage of the cart. The shackles snapped on impact. He pulls one arm free, then the other. He sits down. His head is spinning. A mist spreads across the ground like a purple carpet. He inhales, consciously, through his nose. He analyzes it. A coppery taste on his tongue. Copper compounds, sweetness, opiates, bitterness, alkaloids. This mist isn't natural. It's a chemical mixture, the periodic table in aerosol form. Anyone would die within 10 minutes. First the lungs, then the liver, then the brain. But Daniel has been breathing for 5 minutes now and feels lousy but alive. He looks at his black veins, and then someone else's memories start creeping into his head in fragments. Hyeongyeong Lee, the emperor's 6th son, the curse of black blood. His mother was executed, 18 years in a basement, exiled to the poisonous lands to die. Only Daniel sees this blood differently. Not a curse, adaptation. A hyperactive liver, altered receptors. This body is made to survive right here. And this is where it gets interesting. He stands up. His legs buckle. He falls to his knees. He stands up again. All around are rocks and black grass. The trees are gray with a purple tinge to their leaves. Everything is steeped in poison. Earth, water, air. To the local alchemists, this is a dump, a garbage pit where they throw away everything impure. To a chemist with 30 years of experience, it's a treasure trove. He staggers forward. Every step is a struggle. 18 years in the basement have turned his body into a skeleton covered in skin. His joints creak. But his mind is sharp. And that's what matters. An hour later, he finds a lizard, about 2 meters long. Its scales shimmer with a purple sheen. Dead. Its belly is swollen. Its eyes have popped out. It died from an overdose of its own venom. Daniel sits down next to it. He grabs a sharp shard of obsidian and cuts open the carcass. His hands shake, but they remember the movements. Thousands of dissections at a lab bench aren't forgotten. He finds glands under the lower jaw, swollen with secretion. He removes one, places it on a flat stone. The secretion is thick, yellowish, oily. A paralytic neurotoxin. In its pure form, it kills in a second. But if you isolate the right fraction and dilute it to the exact concentration, you get an anesthetic. A painkiller, the world's first painkiller, in a place where people die of toothaches because pure elixirs cost a fortune. And now, Daniel is smiling, for the first time, not with Hyunjun Lee's lips, with his own. The smile of a weary scientist who fed his mother medicine with half his salary, who fell asleep at the wheel and flew off a bridge, who died, and who is now sitting on the carcass of a giant lizard in the middle of a poisonous wasteland with black veins, thinking one thing: everything here is poisoned. Everything here is toxic. Everything here is what the world has discarded. So everything here is mine. He hides the gland in a scrap of cloth. He walks on, westward. A damp wind blows from that direction. So there's water there. Poisonous, of course. But those are just details. By evening, he finds a stream, sniffs it before drinking. Sulfur, sulfates. He walks upstream, finds a spring in the rock, dips his finger in, licks it. Acid. Almost like lemon juice. An ordinary person would get an ulcer in a week. But for certain reactions, this environment is ideal. He memorizes the spot. Finds a cave at the foot of the cliff. Dry. Strikes a spark from flint. A weak, smoky fire gives off light. Lays out his trophies. Lizard from a lizard. A shard of obsidian. Scraps of fabric. Broken shackles. Not much, but enough for the first day. He closes his eyes, and someone else's memory creeps into his head again. A dark cell, a cold floor, a bowl of thin porridge once a day. A guard spits through the bars. The children of other concubines throw stones. His mother screams somewhere above. Then she falls silent, forever. Daniel opens his eyes. He is not Hyunjung, but he is in his body, and the memory of this body has become his own. The boy lived 18 years in hell. He never once saw the sun. He never heard a kind word, and in the end, they pushed him into the abyss. Because his blood was black. Because it's easier to kill the incomprehensible than to understand it. He clenches his fists. His nails dig into his palms. Blood oozes out. Black. Thick. He stares at it for a long time. Then he wipes his hands on his pants. He lies down on the stone floor. Tomorrow is the second day. He needs to find more ingredients. Figure out what plants grow here. Find clay for crucibles. And find people. Since convicts were exiled here, that means there are people. Preferably alive, because the dead don't need elixirs. The morning began with pain in every muscle. A stone floor isn't the best bed for a body that had lain on straw in a basement for 18 years. Daniel sat up. He stretched. Something cracked in his back. He winced. He stepped out of the cave. The fog outside was thicker than yesterday. Violet. It lay on the ground in a dense layer. But above the waist, the air was clearer. He could breathe. His body was holding up. First, he returned to the spring. He filled a fragment of shackles with water. He drank. The acid burned his throat, but his stomach accepted it. 10 minutes later, it didn't get any worse, so it was okay. He set himself a task for the day: reconnaissance within a 2-hour walk in every direction from the cave. Collect anything that looked like potential raw material. Look for clay or something similar. And most importantly, look for people. He headed north, through black grass and gray trees. The local flora was ugly but incredibly resilient. Grass grew on bare rock. Tree roots reached into cracks in the rock. Mushrooms covered everything that didn't move. Daniel stopped at every new plant. He sniffed, he touched, he examined. His fingers memorized the texture. His nose distinguished the chemical notes. In 2 hours, he counted 14 species of mushrooms, 7 species of herbs, 3 types of moss, 2 lichens, and 1 tree with bark covered in shiny crystals. He chipped off a piece, licked it. Bitter, strong, an alkaloid, something like quinine. He wished he could write it down, but he had nothing to write with and nowhere to write it. He began to memorize. He made a table in his head. Number, description, taste, smell, texture, presumed composition, potential use. 14 years in science had taught him one thing: memorize, classify, repeat. By the third hour, he found something more important than the plants. Bones. Human. Many. Scattered in the hollow between the rocks. Skulls, ribs, vertebrae, some very old, yellow, brittle, others fresher. Some still had scraps of clothing on them, shackles, rusty, like his. It was a convict's graveyard. Those who had been thrown off the wall before him, dozens, maybe hundreds. Daniel stood and watched. Then he bent down, not toward the bones, toward the mushrooms growing on them, black, with velvety caps, large. They covered every corpse, feeding on them. He plucked one, broke it open. Inside, the flesh was gray with bluish streaks. The smell was sharp, not putrid, but medicinal, like an antiseptic. Daniel froze, crouched down, brought the mushroom closer to his nose, inhaled deeply. Phenolic compounds, definitely. This mushroom produced something from the phenolic series, mushrooms that grow on organic matter in a toxic environment. They must protect themselves from bacteria, which means they produce antibacterial substances. Not penicillin, of course, but something from the same class. He gathered 12 of them, wrapped them in a cloth. He pressed them to his chest like a child. It was a treasure. If he was right, he held the prototype of an antibiotic in a world where people die from a cut that has become infected. He returned to the cave around noon. He laid out his finds: mushrooms from the bones, crystals from the bark, 3 types of moss, lizard iron, pieces of obsidian, shards of shackles. He needed vessels, containers for extraction, a source of steady heat. Clay. He went out again. He walked toward the stream. He walked downstream. 20 minutes later, the stream flowed into a small lake. The banks were soft. He bent down. He dug with his hand. Under a layer of gravel was clay, reddish, dense. He gathered as much as he could, brought it back to the cave, began to mold. Crucibles, rough, crooked, but functional. 2 small ones for extraction, 1 large one for heating, a small dish for water, a lid. He fired them right there on a bonfire of gray branches. The wood burned poorly. It gave off little heat. But the clay set, not perfectly, porous, fragile, but enough for the first experiments. By evening, he had a laboratory. Ridiculous, pathetic. A cave in the rock, a stone table, clay crucibles, an obsidian knife, a fire made of moss and twigs, no equipment, no reagents, no measuring instruments. Daniel looked at all this and thought that his research advisor, Professor Park, would have died of a heart attack if he'd seen it. And then he thought that Professor Park probably already thought Daniel was dead. Because Daniel was dead. The Hyeongyeong Bridge, a 30-hour shift, eyes closed at the wheel. The end. He shook his head. Not the time. He got to work. The first experiment, the black mushroom. He chopped it up with an obsidian knife, placed the flesh in a small crucible, poured in water from the spring. The water's acidity was supposed to aid the extraction. He heated it over the fire, brought it to a boil. He waited. The water turned a dark gray color. He removed it from the heat, let it settle. An hour later, a thin film formed on the surface, oily, with an iridescent sheen. He carefully scraped it off with an obsidian blade, transferred it to a second crucible. It was a fraction, rough, impure, but the first fraction of his new life. He sniffed it. The phenolic smell grew stronger, more concentrated, a good sign. Now he needed a test. On someone. On himself, of course. There were no other volunteers. He scratched his forearm with the obsidian. Not deep. Blood oozed out. Black. He applied a drop of the extract to the wound. He waited. A burning sensation. Mild. Then it passed. 10 minutes later, no side effects. No nausea, no dizziness, no redness around the wound. The extract didn't kill the cells. That's a good start. Testing the antibacterial effect is harder. It takes time. It requires an infection. He wrapped the wound in a cloth soaked in the extract. He left the control wound on his other arm untreated. A crude, primitive method, but the only one available. On the fourth day, the control wound became inflamed. It turned red. The edges swelled. The classic onset of infection. The wound with the extract was clean. The edges were smooth. No inflammation at all. Daniel sat by the fire and looked at his hands. At the left one with the inflammation. At the right one without. And he chuckled quietly. It works. Roughly. Primitive. No dosage control and no understanding of the exact mechanism. But it works. He has an antibacterial agent. In a world where such a thing doesn't exist. He rinsed the control wound with the extract. By morning, the inflammation had begun to subside. The fifth day began with a sound. Distant. Low. A cough. Not an animal. A human. Daniel froze at the cave entrance. He listened. The coughing repeated. Closer. From behind the rocks west of the stream. He took his obsidian knife. Not because he intended to attack, but because he had no intention of dying unarmed. He followed the sound. Behind the rocks, he found a path. Narrow, well-trodden. People had walked here. The path led down to a crevice. An old man lay in the crevice, skinny to the point of transparency. His white hair was matted with sweat. His clothes had rotted down to rags. He was lying on his side, coughing. Each fit turned him inside out. There was blood on the rocks nearby. Dark, clotted, pulmonary hemorrhage. Daniel approached. The old man opened his eyes. Cloudy, yellow. His liver was failing too. He looked at Daniel, at his black veins, at the teenager's thin body, and rasped that he was just another condemned man, that he had to leave, that his illness was contagious. Daniel crouched down beside him. He pressed his ear to the old man's chest. Rails, wet, bilateral, crepitation. The lungs are congested. He felt the lymph nodes, enlarged. He touched the skin, hot, dry, high fever. A classic picture. Severe bacterial pneumonia. Maybe what the locals call lung plague, end stage. Without treatment, death in a couple of days. With treatment. Daniel looked at his hands. He had black fungus extract. It worked on a scratch. But pneumonia isn't a scratch. He needed a different dosage, a different method of administration. The drug had to reach the lungs. That meant inhalation, or a high-concentration oral solution. The risk was enormous. He didn't know the toxicity of systemic use. It might kill the old man faster than the plague. But the old man would die without it anyway, in 2 days at most. Daniel made his decision in 3 seconds, just like back then with the broken flask. Daniel ran back to the cave, or rather, did what his emaciated body could manage instead of running. A fast, unsteady stride, gasping for breath after a minute. His knees buckled, but he made it. He gathered everything he had. The crucible with the extract, a supply of mushrooms, water from the spring, an obsidian knife, a clean cloth, a clay bowl. He carried it to the crevice in 2 trips. The old man lay just as he had left him. Only the coughing had become less frequent. A bad sign. Not because he was getting better, because he no longer had the strength to cough. The first thing Daniel did was increase the concentration. He took 6 mushrooms instead of 2. He ground them up. He added just enough water. He boiled it longer, almost an hour. The solution turned black as pitch, thick, viscous. He skimmed off the top layer. It was twice as concentrated as the previous one. Good for effectiveness, dangerous for side effects. Second, he needed a way to get it into his lungs. Inhalation. He poured the extract into a small bowl, placed it over the coals. The extract began to evaporate. The vapor was dark, acrid. Daniel inhaled it himself. First himself. Always himself first. It burned his throat. Not badly. Tolerable. 5 minutes later, nothing bad. The black blood body could handle it. But the old man didn't have that kind of resilience, so the vapor was too concentrated. He diluted the extract with water, 1 part to 3. He heated it again. He inhaled again. Softer. Easier. Time to try. He pulled the old man closer to the coals. He lifted his head. He leaned him over the bowl. The old man was breathing raggedly. shallowly. The vapor entered his lungs in small doses. Daniel held his head for 20 minutes. His arms went numb. His back ached. But he held on. After the inhalation, he gave the old man some of the diluted extract to drink. A teaspoon, roughly. There was no measuring spoon. By eye. The old man coughed. He spat out some of it, but he swallowed some. Daniel laid him back down, covered him with the remaining cloth, built a fire nearby. The night in the poisonous lands was cold. The fog thickened as darkness fell. The temperature dropped. The old man shivered even by the fire. Daniel lay down beside him, pressed himself against him. Body heat. The only thing he could offer besides medicine. It was pitiful and absurd. A skinny teenager with black veins hugging a dying old man in a rocky crevice at the edge of the world. Not a single proper tool. Not a single proven medication. Only intuition and desperation. Daniel didn't sleep. He counted the old man's breaths. 24 per minute. Too fast. That meant his body was fighting. Or giving up. Morning. The old man was alive. Breathing 22 times a minute. Slightly better. Or a fluctuation. Daniel gave another dose. Inhalation. A drink. Water. He made the old man drink water. A lot. Acidic water from the spring. A risk for the stomach, but dehydration would kill him faster. He spent the whole day by his side, changed the compresses, turned the old man onto his side when the cough became wet, cleared out the phlegm, heated water, prepared the extract. By the evening of the second day, the old man's temperature had dropped. Not much, but noticeably. His skin became slightly moister. That was a good sign. His body had started to sweat. That meant his immune system had responded. It had received a boost. On the third day, the old man opened his eyes. Not cloudy, slightly clearer than before. He looked at Daniel, at his black hands, smeared with soot and mushroom flesh, at the clay pots around him, at the fire, at the bowl of black extract, and he asked what kind of decoction it was. Daniel replied that it was a medicine made from a mushroom. The old man frowned. He asked what kind of mushroom. Daniel said a black one, the one that grows on corpses. The old man turned pale. His eyes widened. He tried to sit up. He couldn't. He fell back down and said that Daniel was mad. That the black mushroom was the abomination of abominations, that no alchemist in their right mind would touch it, that it was poisoned filth. Daniel shrugged. He replied that 2 days ago, the old man was dying. Now he was talking and getting upset, so the abomination was working. The old man fell silent for a long time. Then he asked who he was. Daniel said his name was Hyunjun Lee, the Sixth Prince. The old man stared at him, at the black veins, at the gaunt face, and said quietly that he had heard of the Sixth Prince, of the cursed child with black blood. Daniel nodded. He asked who the old man was. The old man closed his eyes. He was silent, and replied that his name was Chun Do-gyung, that 30 years ago he had been the grand apothecary of the Eastern House, that he had been exiled for refusing to poison the air, that for 30 years he had survived alone in these lands, fed on mushrooms and lizards, drank poisonous water. His body had adapted somewhat, but his lungs had given out. He knew he was dying. He accepted it. And then a boy with black hands came and poured a decoction of a corpse mushroom down his throat, and the boy turned out to be a prince. The world went mad. Daniel fed him for 4 days, a broth made from the roots of the gray tree, tasteless, bitter, but nutritious. The extract 3 times a day, inhalation in the morning and evening, water every hour. By the 5th day, the old man sat up on his own. By the 6th, he stood up. He was swaying. His legs wouldn't hold him, but he stood. Daniel stood beside him, ready to catch him. Old Man Chan looked up at the sky. A purple mist hung low. Above it was a gray sky. Ugly. But the old man looked at it as if it were a sunrise, because 3 days ago, he didn't think he'd see it again. On the seventh day, Master Chan wept. Not from pain, not from weakness. He knelt before Daniel and took his hands, black with soot, thin, dirty, scratched by obsidian, and pressed them to his forehead. Daniel tried to pull away. He wasn't used to it, not in his past life, nor in this one. But the old man held him tight and said that in 30 years in the poisonous lands, he had seen many deaths and not a single healing. That the alchemy known to this world operates by the law of purity. Pure raw materials, pure essence, pure result. And Daniel took the filthiest things imaginable. A mushroom from a corpse, poisonous water, cursed blood, and turned them into a miracle. He said that Daniel wasn't cursed, that he was a different kind of alchemist, and that the world had never seen anyone like him before. Daniel was silent. Then he quietly replied that he'd like some tea right now. Good green tea, with rice crackers. The old man blinked. He didn't get it. Daniel waved his hand, said, "Forget it," an inside joke. They spent the next few days together. Master Chan was recovering, slowly but surely, and while he was recovering, he talked. 30 years of knowledge, 30 years of observation. He knew the poisonous lands like the back of his hand. He knew where which plants grew, where the lizards lived, where the caves were, where the water was less poisonous, where the fog was thickest, where the trails were, and most importantly, he knew that people lived here. Not just him, hundreds, maybe thousands, scattered throughout the territory. Convicts, descendants of convicts, lepers, outcasts, those whom the world had cast out beyond the wall. They survived, somehow. Barely, but they survived. Daniel listened, he memorized, he mapped it all out in his head, and he planned. He needed people, not for an army, not for power, for a laboratory. He needed hands to gather raw materials, feet to search for new ingredients, eyes to monitor reactions. One man cannot build a pharmaceutical industry, not even a genius, not even with the memory of 2 lifetimes. He needed a team, and he knew what to pay for it, the one thing he possessed: medicine. Master Chan led him to the first settlement after 3 days' journey. It was hidden in a crevice in the rock, a narrow passage, barely wide enough to squeeze through sideways. Beyond the passage lay a hollow, 100 meters wide. Rock walls rose on all sides. At the bottom, shacks, a dozen of them, built from stones and the bones of large lizards, roofs made of animal hides. People, 23 people. Daniel counted them. Old people, women, children, not a single healthy one. Skin sores, festering wounds, coughing, blindness, lameness. It was a colony of lepers, those who had been cast beyond the wall not for crimes, but for their disease. Master Chan knew them. He came by occasionally. He helped as best he could, but he could do little. Without ingredients, without a laboratory, without instruments, he was just an old man with knowledge he had no use for. The people looked at Daniel warily, a skinny boy with black veins. He looked scarier than some of them. Master Chong said that this young man had cured him of the plague. Silence. Then disbelief. Then anger. One of the old men spat and said that no boy could cure the plague, that Chan had survived on his own, that everyone here had seen people promise miracles and then take everything they had left. Daniel didn't argue. He surveyed the settlement. His eyes found the one in the worst shape. A woman, around 40, maybe younger. Hard to say. Her face was swollen. Her right arm was covered in sores from her wrist to her elbow. The wound was open, infected, pus, the stench. Classic gangrene. Without treatment, she'd lose her arm in a week. Then she'd die of sepsis. He walked over to her. She recoiled. He sat down beside her. He took out his crucible, opened it. Black extract. Showed it to her. Told her it was medicine, that he would clean the wound, that it would hurt, but she would keep her arm. The woman looked at him, at his black veins, at the black liquid in the crucible, and she was silent. Then she held out her hand, not because she believed him, because she had nothing to lose. Daniel worked for 3 hours. He washed the wound with acid water. He cleaned out the pus. He treated it with the extract. He bandaged it with strips of cloth soaked in a diluted solution. The woman didn't scream. She bit her lips. Tears streamed from her eyes, but she didn't scream. When he finished, she lay there pale and drenched in sweat. Daniel told Master Chan to change the bandage twice a day, morning and evening, to rinse it with acid water, to apply the extract. Don't let the wound dry out. He left him a crucible with a supply, and left. He needed to return to the cave, to make more extract, because it wouldn't stop with just one woman. He returned 5 days later, with 4 full crucibles. The woman was sitting at the entrance to the shack. Her arm was bandaged. The swelling had gone down. There was no pus. The edges of the wound had begun to close. She saw Daniel and stood up. She walked over and dropped to her knees. He lifted her by the elbows. He told her not to. She didn't listen. She cried and said her hand was alive, that she could feel her fingers, that she thought she was going to die. The others gathered around, 22 people. They looked at the woman, at her hand, at Daniel. The silence was different, not hostile, shocked. The very same old man who had spat 5 days ago approached. Silently, he pulled up his shirt. On his back was a sore, an old one, deep. It hadn't healed in years. Daniel nodded. He said he'd take a look. In 2 days, he had treated 11 people. Wounds, ulcers, inflammation, infections. The extract worked. Not on everything. Deep, chronic lesions required more, a different concentration, a different approach. But superficial infections were receding. People saw it, with their own eyes, on their own bodies. By the end of the 2nd week, word had spread. Daniel didn't understand how. In these wastelands without roads or communication, news traveled faster than he could walk. Hunters, apparently. Those convicts who roamed the lands in search of food. They saw. They told others. And people began to come to his cave, one by one, 2 by 2. The sick, the wounded, the desperate. The first to arrive was a man with frostbitten feet. His toes had turned black, not from black blood, from necrosis. Daniel couldn't save the toes. He amputated 2, with an obsidian knife. He cauterized the wound with a hot stone. He treated it with the extract. The man stayed. He said he had nowhere else to go. Daniel replied that in that case, he should help gather mushrooms. The man nodded. The second to arrive was a girl, about 17, blind, with white spots on her skin. An old woman was leading her by the hand. The girl had been blind since birth. The old woman said they were from a leper colony in the east, that they'd heard about a young man with black hands who heals. They'd been walking for 4 days. The girl was silent. She stood straight. She held her head up, not like a blind person, like someone who has grown accustomed to the darkness and is no longer afraid of it. Daniel examined her eyes. Her pupils did not react to light. Damage to the optic nerve, severe, congenital or early onset. In his former world, this was treated with surgery and stem cells. Here, he had neither. He said he couldn't restore her sight, not now. Maybe later, when there were more resources and knowledge about local ingredients. The girl nodded, calmly, without disappointment, as if she hadn't expected it. Then she asked if she could stay. She knows how to listen. She has good hearing. She can distinguish sounds that others cannot hear. It might come in handy. Daniel wanted to say that this wasn't a shelter. Then he looked at her, at the old woman behind her, at their gaunt figures, at their tattered clothes. And he said yes, stay. The girl's name was Hana Song. The old woman left 2 days later. Hana stayed. By the end of the 1st month, 12 people were living around Daniel's cave. Master Chan, Hana, a man missing 2 fingers named Tae Su, a woman from the leper colony with a healing hand. Her name was Bok. 8 more people of various ages and varying degrees of disability. All sick, all destitute, all cast out. Daniel treated them one by one. Between treatments, he assigned tasks. Tae-soo gathered mushrooms. Bok carried water. Two young men dug up clay and molded crucibles under Daniel's guidance. Hana sat by the fire and listened to the solutions boil. She really did have an incredible ear. She could distinguish the 3 stages of boiling by sound. A bubbling sound when the solution wasn't ready yet. A hissing sound when evaporation begins. A high-pitched whistle when the concentration reaches its peak. Daniel checked. She was never wrong. Not once. He put her in charge of monitoring the temperature. She did it better than he did himself. 12 people. The first community. Daniel named it the Black Cauldron, in honor of the crucible that boils everything others have thrown away. The first month ended and Daniel took stock. The lab had grown from 1 cave to 3. The main one for extraction, the second for drying and storing raw materials. The third was for the sick, a makeshift infirmary. The crucibles had improved. The men had learned to make them thinner and smoother. Daniel showed them how to control the wall thickness. The firing process had also improved. They found coal deposits a 2-hour walk to the north. Not real coal, more like compressed peat with a high carbon content. It burned hotter and more evenly than wood. With it, the crucibles held their shape. They didn't crack. There were Dyanov knives. Daniel taught Tess how to work stone. Tess turned out to be surprisingly dexterous for a man missing 2 fingers on his left hand. He made blades thinner and sharper than Daniel himself. But the main problem wasn't the lab. The main problem was the fog. Purple. Thick. Toxic. It restricted movement. Ordinary people could breathe it for no more than an hour. Then the dizziness would set in. After 2 hours, vomiting. After 4, loss of consciousness. After 6, death. Only Daniel could walk around as long as he wanted. His black blood body filtered out the toxins. But he couldn't be the only scout and the only collector. He needed an antidote for the fog, or at least a way to increase his tolerance. He started working on it in the 2nd week. The logic was simple. The fog consisted of several toxic components: cyanides, alkaloids, copper compounds, opioid derivatives. If he could create a substance that increased liver enzyme activity for several hours and blocked certain receptors, a person would be able to breathe the fog longer. Not indefinitely, but 4 or 5 hours instead of 1. That's enough for expeditions. He found the raw materials for the antidote in an unexpected place: lizards. Those very giant lizards with venom glands. They had been breathing the mist their whole lives, so their blood contained substances that provided resistance. He tracked down a live lizard, 2 meters long, purple scales, yellow eyes. He couldn't kill it. He didn't have the strength. But he noticed that the lizards drank from the acidic stream, and that after drinking, they fell into a daze for 20 minutes. The acidity of the water acted on them like a mild sedative. He waited, crept up, made an incision on its tail with an obsidian knife. Not deep, collected the blood in a crucible. The lizard twitched, opened an eye. It looked at him. He froze. It yawned, closed its eye, went back to sleep. He walked away on wobbly legs. His hands were shaking, but the crucible was full. The lizard's blood turned out to be a treasure, dark green, thick, with a sharp metallic smell. It contained at least 3 components that Daniel was looking for: a protein that binds cyanides, an enzyme that breaks down alkaloids, and a third thing, something unknown, a substance he hadn't encountered in any textbook. It reacted with copper compounds. It neutralized them. It turned toxic copper into an inert precipitate. Daniel spent 3 days working on the lizard's blood. He separated it into fractions, evaporated it, purified it. He ended up with a brown powder, odorless, slightly bitter to the taste, soluble in acidic water. He called it anti-fog. No imagination, scientific. Just as he would have named a drug in the laboratory testing phase. Tasu was the first test subject. He volunteered. Daniel explained the risks. Tasu shrugged and said it couldn't be any worse than losing his fingers. Daniel gave him a dose of the powder diluted in water. Tasu drank it. He grimaced. He said it tasted like lizard droppings. Daniel didn't ask how he knew what lizard droppings tasted like. Half an hour later, they stepped out into the fog. Daniel walked beside him. He counted the minutes. An hour later, Tessue felt fine. After 2 hours, he started coughing a little. After 3 hours, his eyes turned red. Daniel brought him back to the cave. 3 hours. 3 times longer than usual. The powder was working. Not perfectly. There were side effects. Red eyes, a cough, mild nausea upon returning. But no serious damage. Tessue was fine the next day. Daniel adjusted the dose. He added extract from the bark of the cinchona tree to suppress nausea. He conducted 3 more tests on volunteers. The results improved each time. The final version provided 4 hours in the fog with minimal side effects. 4 hours. That was enough to reach the distant zones, gather raw materials, return. The Black Cauldron came to life. People began to venture farther, to gather more, to bring back new kinds of mushrooms and herbs. Every day Daniel received samples and worked with them. He classified them, tested them, documented them. Master Chan sat nearby. He watched. His classical alchemical education clashed with Daniel's method like a river against a dam. Every day he shook his head. Every day he said it shouldn't work that way. And every day he saw that it did. Once, Daniel showed him how to extract 5 different substances from a single poisonous root through sequential fractionation. Poison, an antidote to that poison, a painkiller, a stimulant, a sleeping potion. 5 products from a single root that any alchemist would have thrown in the trash. Master Chan sat in silence for about 5 minutes. Then he stood up. He went outside. He stood there for a moment. He came back. He sat down and said that in 35 years of practice, he had studied 2,000 recipes. He knew 40 methods of purification. He mastered 12 techniques for condensing essence. And all of that had just turned into a beginner's primer. Daniel shook his head. He replied that no, that his knowledge of formulas was useless without an understanding of this world. That he didn't know the local plants, didn't know how chi essence flowed, didn't know the principles that alchemists had been grasping for 1,000 years. That he needed Master Chun, not as a student, as a partner. The old man was silent for a long time. Then he nodded. At the end of the month, she came. Not alone, with a group. 7 people. Armed. Homemade spears, knives made of bone, leather breastplates, lizard skin masks on their faces. They emerged from the fog like ghosts. Tissue saw them first. He raised the alarm. Daniel came out of the cave. A woman stood at the front. Tall. A head taller than him. A scar across her left eyebrow. Her hair pulled back into a knot. Eyes like a wolf's. Cold. Appraising. She looked at the caves, at the cauldrons, at the people frozen in fear, at Daniel with his black veins and dirty hands. And she said that this must be the very healer from the mist. Daniel asked who she was. She replied that her name was Sanhua, that she was the leader among the convicts of the Western camp, that she had 200 people, and that she had come to check if the rumors were true. Daniel asked what rumors. She replied that they were rumors about a boy who heals with unclean potions, because if it's true, they'll have a talk, and if it's a lie, they'll take everything in the caves and leave. Daniel looked at her, at the 7 armed men behind her, at his own 12 sick and crippled men, at his crucibles of extracts. He had no choice. He told her to show him the sickest one. Sonfa paused. Then she nodded to one of her men. He stepped forward. A large man, pale. His left leg was bandaged with rags. He was limping. He leaned heavily on his spear. Daniel stepped forward. He unwound the bandage. A wound on the shin. Deep, ragged. A bite. Something large. Infection. Fever. Red streaks were rising up his leg. Sepsis. Early stage. Another day or 2 and it would reach the blood. Then it would be over. Daniel said he would cure it, that it would take 3 days. Songfa crossed her arms over her chest and said she would wait. Right here. He worked for 3 days, rinsing, cleaning, extract, a new formula for deep wounds with an added root extract, dressings 4 times a day. The man gritted his teeth, but endured it. Songhwa stood nearby, watching, silently. Her people sat at the entrance. They didn't help, they didn't interfere, they waited. On the 3rd day, the man stood on both feet. He walked around. There was pain, but the red streaks had disappeared. The fever had subsided. The wound was closing. He turned to Songhwa and said his leg was alive. Songhwa looked at Daniel, for a long time, expressionless. Then she asked what he wanted. Daniel said he wanted to heal people, that he needed resources, raw materials, working hands, protection. That on his own, he could heal a dozen. With her people, hundreds. Songhwa asked what he wanted in return. He said elixirs, for all her people, for free. She laughed, sharply, briefly. She said nothing comes for free, that everything has to be paid for, sooner or later. Daniel replied that she would pay when she decided he was worth it. For now, she could consider this a free trial. Sonva narrowed her eyes. He wasn't sure, but it seemed to him that something resembled interest. She said she'd be back in 10 days, with the sick, and she'd take a look. She turned around. She walked off into the fog with her people. Tsu approached Daniel and told him he was crazy, that Songhwa was the wolf of the fog, that she'd killed more people than the plague, that getting involved with her meant certain death. Daniel shrugged. He replied that he'd already tried death. Didn't like it. Songhwa returned on the 9th day, not in 10 days as she'd promised, a day early. She brought not 7, but 26 people. The sick, the wounded, the dying. They were carried on stretchers made of animal skins, led by the arms, dragged along the ground. The procession stretched 100 meters. Daniel stood at the cave entrance and watched. 26 patients. He had 3 crucibles of extract, 2 knives, 1 pair of hands. Master Chon stood beside him. He said quietly that it was too many, that supplies wouldn't be enough, that people would die right here and Songhwa would blame them. Daniel didn't answer. He was calculating in his head the amount of extract needed per treatment, the number of mushrooms in stock, the time to produce a new batch. It didn't add up. There wasn't enough. He turned to Taesu and told him to gather everyone who could walk. Everyone is going to gather mushrooms. Right now. 4 hours of anti-fog. Gather everything they find. Every mushroom is worth a life. Teze ran off. Songhwa approached. She stood before him, arms crossed, her face stony. She said that among these people were her closest ones, those with whom she had survived for 10 years, that if even one dies because of him, she'll cut his head off. Daniel looked up at her. She was a head taller, broader in the shoulders, with a scar and the eyes of a wolf. He said he couldn't promise everyone would survive, that some were too much of a burden, that he'd do everything he could, but miracles don't happen. Songhwa clenched her teeth. Daniel saw a muscle twitch in her jaw. She said, "Then do everything you can, and let that be enough." He worked 17 hours, without a break, examined all 26, sorted them out. 3 in critical condition, sepsis, gangrene, lung infection. 7 in serious condition, deep wounds, advanced infections, 16 with moderate to mild injuries, ulcers, burns, fractures, chronic pain. He started with the critical cases. The first man had gangrene in his foot. The stench was so bad that people backed away 10 steps. Daniel didn't back away. He performed the amputation, the foot below the ankle, with an obsidian knife, without anesthesia. 4 men held the patient down. He screamed. Then he consciousness. It was for the best. Daniel cauterized the stump with a red-hot stone, treated it with an extract, bandaged it. Master Chan assisted. The old man's hands didn't tremble. He'd seen this before, 30 years ago. in another life. The second patient with sepsis, a young woman, about 20 years old. Her fever was so high that she radiated heat from a distance of a hand's length. Delirium. She was muttering something incoherent. Daniel gave her the maximum dose of the extract orally. He applied compresses soaked in acid water. The fever had to be brought down at any cost. He remembered the stimulant he'd obtained from a poisonous root. A small dose should boost the immune system. He gave her a quarter of what he would have given an adult man. She was too exhausted for a full dose. The third old man with a lung infection. Just like Master Chong a month ago, same protocol. Inhalation, oral solution, water, warmth, waiting. By morning, he was done with the serious cases. His hands were shaking, his eyes were heavy, his mouth was dry. He hadn't eaten in 18 hours. Hana brought him a cup of broth. He drank it, bitter, warm. He continued. The moderate and mild cases took another 6 hours. Washing, dressings, extract. He set 2 fractures, applied splints made of lizard bones. By the time he finished, it was morning again. He hadn't slept for more than a day. He sat down on a rock by the entrance. The world swayed. He closed his eyes. For a second. He woke up because someone had covered him with a hide. It was dark. So a whole day had passed. He had slept standing up, or rather, sitting with his back against the rock. A fire was burning nearby. Sonva was sitting by the fire, alone, staring into the flames. Daniel stirred. She turned her head. She said he had slept for 14 hours, that the man without a foot was alive, his fever had broken, that the woman with sepsis had opened her eyes an hour ago, that the old man was still in critical condition, but breathing more evenly. Daniel nodded. He wanted to stand up. His legs wouldn't obey him. He fell back down. Sunhwa didn't help. She didn't move. She just watched. Then she said he was an idiot. That no normal person would work for a day without food or sleep for the sake of strangers. That he was either a saint or a madman. Daniel replied that he was a scientist. Sunhwa snorted. She asked what difference it made. 3 days later, all 26 were stable. Not a single one had died. The man without a foot was learning to walk on a crutch that Teze had carved for him. The woman with sepsis was eating broth and complaining that it tasted bad. The old man with lung problems was still lying down, but was coughing less often. Sunhwa checked on them every morning, silently. She checked. She watched. She said nothing. On the 4th day, she approached Daniel. He was sitting in the lab, grinding mushroom powder. She placed a bundle in front of him. He unwrapped it. Inside was an ointment, old, dried out, in a cracked clay jar. Sunhwa said it was the last thing she had left from her past life. An ointment her mother had made for her when she was a child, for back pain. She had carried that jar for 10 years. The ointment had gone bad long ago. It didn't help, but she couldn't throw it away. Daniel took the jar, opened it, sniffed it. Rancid fat, remnants of herbal extract. Everything had oxidized, a dead product. But he understood what she meant. Not the ointment, the pain. 10 years of back pain from an old wound. He didn't ask where the wound came from. He just nodded, said he'd make a new one, better, in 2 days. He made it in an hour and a half. Painkiller from lizard gland, anti-inflammatory from red moss, regenerative component from black mushroom extract, all mixed in a fat base. He placed the jar on a rock at the entrance to her tent. Silently, he left. That night, Sonva took the jar. In the morning, she came to him, gloomy, silent. She stood there for a long time. Then she said that if he betrayed her, she would kill him herself. But as long as he hadn't betrayed her, she was with him. Daniel nodded. He asked if that meant the 200 people from the Western camp were now with the Black Cauldron. Sonwa said not 200, 312, with wives and children. Daniel blinked. He said he would need more crucibles. 312 people changed everything. Black Cauldron ceased to be a bunch of sick people by the cave. It became a camp. Sanhua's people knew how to build, knew how to hunt, knew how to fight. In the first week, they cleared a site by the rocks. They set up tents made of animal skins. They organized guards. They dug latrines. They dug a channel from the stream. Sanhua gave the orders, and they obeyed her, unquestioningly. Daniel watched and realized that without her, he would have been drowning in chaos. He knew how to heal and create formulas. She knew how to lead people. Two halves of a single mechanism. Master Chan blossomed. 30 years of solitude were over. Now he had students. 3 young men from Sanhua's people volunteered to help in the laboratory. The old man taught them the basics of classical alchemy, how to grind ingredients, how to control the heat, how to recognize the stages of extraction by color and smell. Daniel supplemented his lessons with his own method: fractionation, separation into components, controlling acidity. The apprentices listened to both of them. They got confused. They argued among themselves. But they learned. One day, the most gifted of them, a boy named Jeonggi, brought Daniel a root he had found in a crevice, purple, with white veins, a sharp smell of ammonia. Master Chan looked at it and recoiled. He said it was the demon's finger, deadly poisonous. Touching it causes a burn. Swallowing it meant death within a minute. Daniel took the root. He sniffed it. Ammonia, so nitrogen compounds. The white veins were crystallized alkaloids. The purple color came from anthocyanins. He snapped the root in half. He examined the cross-section. 3 layers: outer bark, middle layer, pith, each layer with a different composition. He told Master Chan that an anesthetic could be extracted from this root, a real one, not a painkiller that numbs pain temporarily, but a substance that blocks nerve signals in a specific area, local anesthesia. Surgeons could operate without the patient losing consciousness from the pain. Master Chan shook his head, but he didn't argue anymore. He had seen enough to stop arguing with Daniel about poisons. In the 3rd week of the 2nd month, Yuna appeared. At first, Daniel didn't recognize her. A short girl in a dirty lab coat, magnifying crystals on a leather strap, stained fingers, a notebook under her arm. She stood at the entrance to the lab and looked inside. Master Chong saw her and froze. His face changed. It softened. It became almost childlike. He spoke her name, Yuna. She rushed to him, hugged him, didn't say a word, just held him. The old man stroked her head with a dirty, trembling hand. Daniel stood to the side, waiting. Then he found out. Yuna, Chan Yuna, Master Chan's granddaughter. She was 4 when her grandfather was exiled. She grew up alone. Her mother died young. Her father drank. Yuna taught herself alchemy from her grandfather's notes, which she hid under the floorboards. At 20, she tried to join the guild. They refused her, a woman. At 22, she tried again. They rejected her. Impure blood. Her grandfather was an exile. His shame became her shame. She decided to find him. It took her 3 months to reach the wall. She spent a month searching for a passage. She found it. She nearly died in the fog. Sanhua's people found her half dead on the Western Trail. They brought her to the camp. When they told her there was an old alchemist here, she ran. Master Chan was crying. Quietly. Silently. Tears streamed down his wrinkles and disappeared into his beard. Yuna cried too. Then she stepped back, wiped her face, looked at Daniel, businesslike, asked if he had healed her grandfather. Daniel nodded. She asked how. He showed her the extract. She sniffed it, frowned, asked what the base was. He explained. She asked him to demonstrate the process. He showed her. Extraction, fractionation, concentration. Yuna watched, without blinking. Her fingers clenched the diary so tightly that her knuckles turned white. When he finished, she was silent for a minute. Then she said it was impossible, that alchemy didn't work that way, that the law of purity forbids the use of toxic raw materials, that the entire theory is built on the principle of expelling the impure. Daniel said the theory was wrong. Yuna opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again, said she needed to sit down, sat right on the lab floor, opened her journal. She began to write, quickly, furiously. She filled 3 pages in 10 minutes. Then she looked up and said she wanted to stay, that she wanted to learn, that she was ready to do anything. Daniel looked at her crystal glasses, at the journal, at her smudged fingers, at her hungry eyes. He recognized that look. He'd looked that way himself 20 years ago when he first saw under a microscope how cobra neurotoxin worked, the fire in the eyes of a man who'd found his calling. He said he didn't need a student who would do anything. He needed a partner who thinks. Yuna frowned. He said she understood classical alchemy better than her grandfather, that he'd seen how she'd monitored the process, that she asked the right questions, not how it works, but why it shouldn't work. That means she sees the contradiction, sees the limits of old knowledge, and stands at that boundary. He said she didn't need to start from scratch. She needed to retrain. And for that, she needed her own lab, a second workspace, her own experiments, her own results. Yuna looked at him. Her lips trembled. She lowered her head. Her shoulders shook. Master Chan stepped toward her, but Daniel stopped him with a gesture. These weren't tears of grief. These were the tears of a person who, for the first time in her life, had been told she was good enough. A week later, Yuna was running the second lab. They expanded the cave. They set up a second row of crucibles. Yuna worked like a woman possessed. She slept 4 hours a night. She ate without looking. She filled her journal on both sides of every page. She reviewed everything she knew, every recipe, every principle. She tested them using Daniel's method. What works, what doesn't, what can be improved. In the first week, she independently synthesized an improved version of the antifog. She added a component from blue moss that stabilized the formula. The duration increased from 4 hours to 5.5. Daniel checked it. He confirmed it. He looked at her, said, "Good job." Yuna blushed to the roots of her hair and dropped the crucible. The third month began with a discovery. Sunhwa's scouts found a cave system 5 hours' journey to the south. A massive one. Dozens of chambers, underground rivers, and mushrooms. Not black ones, different ones, white ones, glowing ones. They covered the walls and ceilings like a solid carpet. The scouts didn't dare go deep inside. They brought back samples. Daniel examined them. A white mushroom with a faint blue glow. Soft, porous, odorless. He broke off the cap. Inside, the flesh was moist. Thick white juice. He applied a drop to his skin. Nothing. No reaction. He tasted it. Neutral, slightly sweet. For a poisonous world, this was suspicious. He ran an analysis. Acidic reaction, heating, fractionation. And he found it. The white mushroom contained a substance that actively bound toxins. Any toxins. It worked as a universal sorbent. Like activated charcoal, only 10 times more effective. If you made a solution out of it and gave it to a person to drink, the substance would pass through the intestines and collect all the poisons that had accumulated in the body. Purification. Detoxification. For people who had lived in a toxic environment for years, this meant one thing: a second chance. Daniel organized an expedition. 20 people, all on antifog. 5 hours there, 3 hours to gather, 5 back. It was a tight schedule. Sonva went alone. She led the group. Daniel stayed behind. He couldn't waste antifog. His body could handle it on its own. But he needed to be in the lab. Yuna was conducting a parallel experiment with the demon's finger root, an anesthetic. They were working on the dosage. Too little and the pain broke through. Too much and the whole body went numb. Precision was needed. Yuna suggested using qi essence as a conduit, a local method. The qi channels in the body are like the vascular system. If you dissolve the anesthetic in a medium compatible with qi, it will travel through the channels and block only the necessary area. Daniel didn't understand qi. He was a biochemist, not a mystic, but he trusted Yuna. She knew this side of the world better. They gave it a try. An extract from the root pith dissolved in qi-active water from a deep spring. Master Chan had found this spring 20 years ago. The water from it enhanced the effect of any alchemical preparation. Daniel believed it was due to the mineral composition. Chun believed it was due to the concentration of natural qi. Both were right in their own way. The result worked. The anesthetic acted precisely. They applied it to Tesu's left arm. Within a minute, he couldn't feel his arm from the elbow to his fingertips. His right arm worked normally. An hour later, sensation returned completely. No side effects. Tesu said it was witchcraft. Daniel said it was pharmacology. Yuna said it was both and laughed. The expedition returned with sacks of white mushrooms. Sunhwa said the caves were enormous. There were enough mushrooms to last for years. And something else. Deep inside the caves, she saw walls. Not natural, man-made. The stone was cut cleanly, right angles, steps. Someone had built this long ago. A very long time ago. Daniel remembered. He put it aside for later. Right now, the mushrooms were more important. He launched the detoxification program. Every camp resident received a dose of white mushroom solution once a day. The course lasted 10 days. The effects became apparent on the third day. People began to look better. Their skin brightened. Their eyes became clearer. The chronic cough that had plagued half the camp began to subside. The hand tremors stopped in 6 people. An old woman who hadn't stood up in 2 years got up and walked to the stream on her own. She stood by the water and cried. Sonhwa's people watched. The people of the Black Cauldron watched. Everyone saw the same thing. A man who had been rotting alive for years began to come back to life. Not from an expensive elixir made of pure ingredients worth a fortune, from a mushroom from the cave. Free, endless. The one that grew in the darkness on the walls of the dungeon. Between the 4th and 5th months, 3 things happened that changed Daniel's status from healer to leader. First, he cured a child, a 3-year-old boy, the son of one of Sunhwa's women, born in the poisonous lands. He had been unable to breathe normally since birth. He wheezed. He turned blue. He gasped for air with every effort. His mother carried him in her arms, never letting him go. She didn't sleep at night. She listened to his breathing. Daniel examined the child. His lungs had developed in a toxic environment. His bronchi were constricted. His mucous membranes were chronically inflamed. He prescribed a course of treatment, inhalations of a special solution, microdoses of white mushroom taken orally, and warm extract compresses on his chest. 3 weeks. 3 weeks later, the boy laughed. His mother had never heard him laugh in her life. Because laughter requires a deep breath, and a deep breath was beyond his reach. She heard it and fell to her knees. She held him close. She sobbed, loudly, uncontrollably. Sunhwa stood nearby and turned away. Daniel saw she ran her hand over her face. Quickly. Once. She didn't do it again. Second, conflict. Among Sunhwa's people was a man named Ganggu, a former gangster, strong, brutal. He obeyed Sunhwa out of fear, not respect. When the camp grew and there was more food, Ganggu decided it was time to take what was his. He gathered 7 men. At night, they broke into the elixir warehouse. They took 3 crucibles of extract, 4 doses of anti-fog, a sack of white mushrooms, and they left. In the morning, Daniel saw the empty warehouse. Sunhwa saw the tracks. She took 10 fighters and followed the trail. Daniel told her to wait. She didn't stop. She returned 2 days later, with the crucibles, with the mushrooms, with the anti-fog, without Ganggu. Daniel asked what had happened. Sunhwa said that Ganggu and his men had gone into the deep fog without a sufficient dose. She found them 3 hours walk away. 5 were dead. 2 were in agony. She took the supplies. 2 died while she was walking back. Daniel was silent. Sunhwa said that was the law of the wasteland. Whoever steals from the community steals lives. The fog had passed judgment. Daniel didn't argue. Not because he agreed, because he realized that his rules didn't work here yet. But he remembered. Third, the plantation. Yuna suggested not just gathering mushrooms, but growing them. A controlled environment, an underground cave, constant temperature, controlled humidity, a substrate of crushed lizard bones and humus. Daniel latched onto the idea. They found a suitable cave, small, warm, with dripping water. They laid out the first plantation, black mushroom, white mushroom, red moss. A month later, the first harvest. Controlled, predictable, stable. It was a turning point. They stopped depending on what they could find in the wild. They began to produce. The Black Cauldron community became a factory. The sixth month. The camp's population exceeded 500. People came on their own, from distant settlements, from solitary hideouts, from places Master Chan didn't even know existed. Rumors spread across the poisonous lands faster than fog, about a young man with black hands who heals the hopeless, about a camp where there is food and medicine, about a place where no one is beaten or robbed. 500 people, 5 laboratory caves, 3 plantations, 12 assistants in the labs, 30 raw material gatherers, 50 Sunhwa fighters on guard. The rest were building, carrying, preparing. The Black Cauldron was no longer a camp. It had become a settlement. Daniel understood that more was needed. More space, more organization, more order. 500 people in a makeshift camp is not a community. It is chaos waiting for a spark. He called a council, the first in Black Cauldron's history. Sunhwa, Master Chun, Yuna, Taesu, Bok, and Hana. Hana said almost nothing. She sat in the corner. She listened. But Daniel called her, because she heard what others didn't notice. Moods, whispers, discontent. She was his barometer of public opinion. Daniel said they needed a city, not a camp, but a city, with permanent structures, with a water supply, with a distribution system, with laws. Sunhwa said that laws were the first step toward a prison. Daniel replied that the absence of laws is the first step toward a gang. Sunhwa fell silent. Teseo said he knew a place, 2 days' journey to the southeast, a valley, enclosed by cliffs on 3 sides, a river, not a stream, but a real river. Caves in the valley walls, a flat bottom. The fog is thinner there. The wind blows through. He found it 3 weeks ago during a long reconnaissance mission. Daniel asked Hana if she had heard anything about discontent. Hana said quietly that people were afraid of moving, afraid of losing what they already had, but even more afraid of staying, because it's already crowded here, and there isn't enough water. Daniel nodded. The move took 10 days, 500 people, the sick on stretchers, children carried in arms, supplies on their backs, Teagly wrapped in hides, mushroom cultures in baskets, anti-fog for everyone. Sunhwa organized the march like a military operation. Vanguard, main column, rear guard, scouts on the flanks. Not a single person lost, not a single casualty. The valley turned out to be better than Tessue had described. Wider, the river was fuller. The water in it was murky and sour, but not as much as at the spring. It was drinkable after boiling. The caves in the walls were dry and spacious. Some went dozens of meters deep. In one, they found traces of stonework, smooth walls, steps. Just like in those caves in the south that Sunhwa had told them about, someone had lived here before, a long time ago. Construction began immediately. Daniel wasn't an architect, but he knew the principles: sanitation, drainage, ventilation, separation of living areas from work areas, quarantine for the sick, storage in dry caves, laboratories deep within the rocks where the temperature is stable. He drew plans on flat stones with charcoal. Sonva watched and grumbled that he was building a hospital, not a city. Daniel replied that a city that doesn't care about the health is a graveyard waiting to happen. She snorted and went to supervise the builders. A month later, the settlement took shape. Stone houses in the valley, roofs made of animal hides and interwoven branches, a central square, a well with a filter made of white mushrooms and sand. After filtration, the water became almost clear. Still sour, but much cleaner. 3 laboratories in the caves. Yuna was in charge of the second, Master Chan of the third, Daniel of the first. The plantations were moved to new caves. They doubled the size. They added a 4th one for a new type of mushroom they found in the valley. Yellow, small. It grows on rocks by the river. It contained a substance that stimulates tissue regeneration. Not quickly, not miraculously, but noticeably. Wounds healed 20% faster with its extract. A small thing, but a small thing that saves lives when every day counts. Daniel named the settlement Hyeongyeong, the city beyond the mist. Hana suggested the name. She said she heard how the river sounded at dawn, how the rocks sang in the wind, and that this place sounded like a beginning. Daniel didn't argue with the poet. By the 7th month, an idea came that changed everything. Daniel sat in the lab and looked at the shelves. Test tubes with extracts, powders, ointments, solutions. He had 32 ready-made preparations: antibacterial extract, anti-fog, detoxifier, anesthetic, painkiller, stimulant, sleeping pill, fever reducer, anti-inflammatory, regenerative ointment, and another 22 in various stages of development. 32 products made from ingredients the rest of the world considered trash. If even one of these products made it past the wall of sorrow to the Sh Invol, the world will change. Because each of them is cheaper to produce than their counterparts made from pure ingredients. 10 times cheaper, 100 times. The pure veins are depleted. Prices for elixirs are sky high. An ordinary soldier cannot afford a potion for a fever, but Daniel could produce it from a mushroom that grows on a corpse, for free, endlessly. He called Sunhwa, said they needed access to the outside world, a trade route, a smuggling channel. Sunhwa narrowed her eyes, asked why. "They're fine right here." Daniel said, no, not good. That they had no metal, no cloth, no tools, no grain. That they were merely surviving, not living. That in order to live, they needed to trade. And the only thing they had were elixirs. Sunhwa was silent for a long time. Then she said she knew a way. A gorge in the northwest, narrow, dangerous. Smugglers from the border provinces sometimes passed through it. If they sent people there with goods, they could try. Daniel asked who would handle the negotiations. Sunhwa said she would. He shook his head. He said they needed her here, to command the defense, to run the camp. "We need someone else, someone who knows how to talk to the people beyond the wall, in their language, in the language of trade and profit." Sunhwa asked who then. Daniel said he didn't know yet, but he would find out soon, because the world has a habit of throwing the right people our way at the right time. He was only wrong about the timing. The right person didn't show up soon, but 3 days later. More accurately, she was brought in, almost dead, poisoned, in torn clothes made of expensive silk, with a ring on her finger that Master Chan recognized at a glance, the seal of the House of Han. The girl was unconscious, her pulse was weak, her breathing shallow, her skin had a grayish tint. Poison, systemic, not local, professional. Someone poisoned her before she ended up in the lands. Daniel took her hand, looked at her nails, blue, her lips, gray, her pupils, dilated and unresponsive. He turned to Yuna and said they needed a full detox, white mushroom, maximum dose, plus a stimulant, plus respiratory support. They have 3 days, maybe less. For 3 days, Daniel didn't leave the lab. Yuna worked nearby. Master Chan changed the compresses every 2 hours. The girl lay on a stone table covered with animal skins. Her body was fighting and losing. The poison was complex, not a single component, but a mixture. 3 different toxins working in tandem. The first destroyed the walls of the blood vessels. The second suppressed the nervous system. The third blocked kidney function. Professional work. A court poisoner. Whoever wanted this girl to die slowly and painfully. Daniel broke down the poison into its components, not literally, in his head, by the symptoms, by the sequence of manifestations, by how the body reacted to each antidote. For the first 24 hours, he fought the kidney blockage, white mushroom at maximum dose, acidic water as a diuretic, lower back massage to stimulate blood flow. By the end of the first 24 hours, the kidneys were working, weakly, but they were working. The urine was dark, almost black. The toxins were being flushed out. On the second day, he focused on the blood vessels, yellow mushroom extract, tissue regeneration, internal bleeding that he couldn't see but guessed at from the pallor and the drop in pulse. He administered a stimulant every 4 hours, supported the heart, kept the blood pressure below critical levels. Yuna prepared the solutions, quickly, precisely, without asking questions. Only once did she look at Daniel and say that his own hands were shaking and that he needed to eat. He waved her off. She placed a bowl of broth in front of him and didn't leave until he had eaten. The third day was decisive. The nervous system, neurotoxin, the most dangerous component. It was slowly shutting down his brain. The girl hadn't regained consciousness. Her pupils weren't reacting. Her reflexes were fading. Daniel knew that if the process wasn't stopped within the next few hours, even if the body survived, the mind would be lost. He needed a neuroprotectant, a substance that protects nerve cells from destruction. In his former world, these were specialized drugs. Here, he had poison, lizard venom, a paralyzing neurotoxin, in microdoses. The principle was paradoxical. The lizard venom blocked the same receptors targeted by the toxic neurotoxin, but it blocked them temporarily and reversibly. The toxic one, irreversibly. If a microdose of lizard venom were administered, it would occupy the receptors first, like a stopper. The toxic neurotoxin would have nowhere to bind. It would pass by and be excreted from the body. Theory, pure theory, untested, risky. If the dose turns out to be just a little more than necessary, the lizard venom itself will finish off the nervous system. Daniel sat over the crucible of diluted venom and looked at the girl, at her gray face, at her blue lips, at her hand bearing the seal of House Khan, the last of a destroyed line, brought here to die, like all of them. He took a thin strip of cloth, dipped it in the solution, wringed it out. One drop. He lifted her head, parted her teeth, placed the cloth under her tongue. Sublingual administration, rapid absorption, straight into the bloodstream, bypassing the stomach. He counted. Seconds, minutes, pulse, breathing, pupils. Nothing changed. 1 minute, 2, 3. At the 5-minute mark, the pupil of her left eye twitched. It narrowed by a fraction of a millimeter. Then the right one. Daniel exhaled. He didn't realize he'd been holding his breath. There was a reaction. The brain responded. He gave a second drop an hour later, a third 2 hours later. By evening, the pupils were reacting to light. Weakly, but they were reacting. He sat by her side all night. He gave her a drop every 2 hours. By morning, the girl wiggled her fingers. By noon, she opened her eyes. She was looking up at the stone ceiling of the cave. She didn't understand where she was. Her eyes darted around. Her lips moved silently. Daniel leaned down. He said quietly that she was safe, that the poison was almost out of her system, that she needed to lie still and not move. She shifted her gaze to him, to his face, the black veins on his neck, his dirty hands, his eyes red from lack of sleep. She tried to say something. Her voice wouldn't obey her. A rasp came out. He gave her some water. She took a sip. She coughed. Then she quietly asked who he was. Daniel said his name was Hyunjun, that he was a healer. She closed her eyes. Tears streamed down her temples. She whispered that she thought she had died, that she wanted to die, that she saw her family being killed, that she ran, that she didn't remember how she got here. Daniel placed his hand on her forehead. Her forehead was warm, not hot. Her fever had broken. He said that no one would die here, not today. She fell asleep, not from the elixir, from exhaustion. And from the fact that, for the first time in a long time, someone had told her she was safe. Her name was Soyeon Han, 19 years old, the last heiress of House Han. House Han was one of the 7 crowned houses. Was. 3 months ago, it had been destroyed, not by an external enemy, not the Horde, their own people. A neighboring house backed by the 2 great guilds. Officially, it was called the suppression of a rebellion. In reality, it was a seizure of the Han house's territories and alchemical resources. Her family was slaughtered in a single night. Her father, mother, eldest brother, 2 sisters, uncles, aunts, cousins, everyone. Soyeon was saved by the servants. They took her out through an underground passage. Her enemies poisoned her already on the road. They sent an assassin disguised as a merchant. The servants died protecting her. She walked alone, sick, poisoned, without food or water. She reached the wall of sorrow. She found a crack. She fell into the mist. Sunhwa's people found her on the Eastern Trail. Master Chan told Daniel about the House of Han. It was the most peaceful of the 7 houses, the only one that opened hospitals for commoners, the only one that capped the prices of elixirs. For this, the guilds hated him, and for this, they destroyed him. Daniel listened. He took it all in. Soyeon was recovering slowly. She didn't get out of bed for a week. Then she started sitting up, then walking, leaning against the wall. Physically, she was recovering. Mentally, it was worse. She barely spoke. During the day, she sat motionless, staring at a single point. At night, she screamed. She woke up in a sweat. Nightmares. Every night. The faces of the murdered. Screams. Blood. Fire. Daniel could have made her an elixir for deep, dreamless sleep. He had the ingredients. A sleep aid made from a root, a rapid eye movement suppressant derived from lizard venom. He could have mixed them in 2 hours, but he didn't. Not right away. Instead, he came to her in the evening, sat down beside her, silently. He didn't speak. He didn't comfort her. He didn't ask questions. He just sat there. Sometimes she fell asleep when he was nearby. Sometimes she didn't. He came every evening, for 7 days. Yuna asked why he wouldn't give her the sleeping potion. He replied that first he needed to understand what she needed, to forget or to get through it. If to forget, then the elixir. If to get through it, then time and the presence of a living person nearby. On the 8th evening, Soyeon spoke. Quietly, calmly. She told him everything. About the night of the massacre, about her mother's screams, about the blood on the marble floor, about the killer's face, which was smiling. Daniel listened. He didn't interrupt. When she finished, she said she wanted to sleep, without dreams, just for one night. He gave her the elixir. She drank it, fell asleep 10 minutes later, slept until morning, for the first time in 3 months. In the morning, she stepped out of the cave. She stood in the sun. She squinted. Then she turned to Daniel. He was standing by the lab, dirty as usual. She walked over. She straightened her back. She lifted her chin. And she said that she was Soyeon Han, the last of the House of Han. That her home had been destroyed. That her line had ended. That she had nothing left but her name and her knowledge. But if he would allow it, she would offer him the one thing she could. She knew diplomacy. She knew the etiquette of all 7 houses. She knew trade routes and contracts. She knew who owed whom and who hated whom. If he needed a way into the outside world, she would be his voice beyond the wall. Daniel looked at her, at this 19-year-old girl with dark circles under her eyes and bruises on her wrists, who had been dying 3 weeks ago, who had lost her entire family, who saw their faces every night, and who stood before him with her back straight and offered to work. He held out his hand, she held out hers. They shook hands, as partners, as equals. Soyeon smiled, subtly, barely noticeably, her first smile in 3 months. The first batch of elixirs was sent through the gorge in the 8th month. Soyeon had been preparing the operation for 3 weeks. She made a list. What to send, how much, to whom, at what price. Not at market price. Lower. Significantly lower. Daniel asked why sell cheap when you could sell for more. Soyeon replied that the first batch wasn't a sale. It was bait. The buyer had to try it, make sure it worked, get used to it, and then come back for a second batch, and for a third, and for a 10th. Dependence on the product, not the price. Daniel smirked. He said she was thinking like a pharmaceutical corporation. Soyeon didn't get the reference, but nodded. The buyer turned out to be a border garrison, 300 soldiers on the very edge of Shinwol. Beggars. Forgotten by command. Without supplies. Without medicine. Every winter they lost dozens to fever and frostbite. The garrison commander, a man named Captain Yun, was one of those who had long since stopped waiting for help from the Empire and took what he could from wherever he could. Sunhwan knew him. They'd met on the smuggling trails. He bought lizard skins and poisonous crystals from convicts to resell. Small-time business. Now he had been offered something more serious. Soyeon wrote a letter, in calligraphic handwriting on cloth instead of paper, which was unavailable, in the official language of the court, with the seal of the House of Han on her ring. The letter stated that a representative of the rightful heiress of the House of Han was offering an exclusive product, a fever elixir, a painkiller, an antiseptic ointment. The price was half that of the guild's. Payment was not in gold, but in information. Patrol schedules, road maps, news from the capital. Sunhwa delivered the letter herself, with 3 fighters, through the gorge, 2 days there, 2 back. She returned with a reply. Captain Yun agreed, on one condition. He wants to see the goods in person. The meeting took place in the gorge, neutral territory. On one side, Sunhwa with 5 fighters and So-Yun in a cloak hiding her face. On the other, Captain Yun with a dozen soldiers. So-Yun stepped forward. She pulled back her hood. The captain saw the seal on her finger. He turned pale. He knew that the House of Han had been destroyed. He knew that hiding the heiress was punishable by death. But So-Yun spoke calmly, confidently, in that very voice taught in the palace academies. She said she wasn't asking him to take a risk, just to trade. His men were sick. She could help. All she wanted in return was information. Nothing that would harm the garrison, just what everyone already knew. Captain Yun was silent. He looked at the elixirs laid out on the cloth. 12 vials, a fever ointment, a painkiller, an antiseptic. He picked up one vial. He opened it, sniffed it, frowned. The smell was unfamiliar, not like the guild's elixirs, sharper, rougher. He asked what it was made of. So-Yun said ingredients the guild doesn't use. The captain snorted, asked if it worked. So-Yun said he should try it, for free. The first batch was free. If it didn't help, he could forget about the meeting. The captain took all 12 vials. He left. 2 weeks later, he sent a messenger with a bag. In the bag was a map of the border roads, a patrol schedule for the next 3 months, and a note. 4 words. It works. Send more. Daniel read the note and smiled. First client, first channel. The first thread from the poisonous lands into the wider world. So-Yun stood nearby. She was smiling too. Then she said that this was only the beginning, that one garrison was nothing. We need 10, 20. We need the rumors to spread, for the name to be heard. Not Daniel's name, not Hyunjun's name, a nameless figure, a ghost. The ghost alchemist of the mists, the one who cannot be found, but whose elixirs can be bought. Daniel asked why a ghost. So-Yun replied that ghosts aren't killed. People are killed, but ghosts are traded. He nodded. By the 10th month, elixirs were being sent through the gorge every 2 weeks. 3 garrisons, 2 trade caravans, 1 village beyond the pass. In return came metal, cloth, grain, tools, seeds, and information. Lots of information. So-Yun gathered it like a spider gathers flies. Every rumor, every name, every price. She was piecing together a picture of the world beyond the wall. And the picture was grim. The northern horde was advancing. 3 provinces had fallen over the summer. The imperial army was retreating. The 5 great guilds had tripled the prices of battle potions. Soldiers went into battle without potions. They died like flies. In the capital, Crown Prince Hyunsu was consolidating his power. The emperor was ill. Daniel listened and thought about the half-brother whose body he now inhabited. About the boy who had played with Hyunjun in secret. About the young man who had sent him to his death. That night, after one of these briefings, Hana came to him. Quietly, as always. She sat down next to him at the entrance to his cave. She was silent. Then she said she could hear that he didn't sleep at night, that his breathing changed when he thought about something heavy, that he tossed and turned, that sometimes he spoke in his sleep in a language she didn't understand. Daniel was silent. She was right. He spoke Korean. In his dreams, he wasn't Hyunjun Lee, the prince of the empire. He was Daniel Shin, a scientist from Seoul, who missed his mom, his lab, the smell of coffee, the rain over the Han River. He told Hana that sometimes he sees another world in his dreams. She asked if it was beautiful. He said it was ordinary. noisy, cramped. But his mom was there. Hana was silent for a moment. Then she said she didn't have a mom either, and that if he needed a family, he had the Black Cauldron. Daniel looked at her, at the blind girl who couldn't see his face but could hear his pain. He quietly said, "Thank you." She nodded, stood up, left. He lay down and, for the first time in a long time, fell asleep quickly. Year 1. Winter. Hyeongyeong had grown to 2,000 residents. Stone houses stood in rows along the river. Smoke rose from the chimneys into the gray sky. The plantations yielded a harvest every 3 weeks. The laboratories operated in 3 shifts. Yuna oversaw production. Master Chun was training a new generation of alchemists. 12 students, 7 boys and 5 girls. Master Chun grumbled about the girls for exactly 1 day. Then he saw how one of them performed a fractionation more cleanly than 3 of the boys combined. He stopped grumbling. Daniel sat in the first lab and worked on a new project, an elixir for regenerating nerve tissue. For Hana, he had promised her he would restore her sight. Not now, when it was ready. But he worked on it every free night. Black snake venom. He'd found it in the caves to the south. Small, a meter long, black as coal. Neurotropic venom. It acts on nerve fibers. In large doses, it destroys. In microdoses, it stimulates growth. In theory, he had to isolate the right fraction, the right concentration, the right method of administration. Months of work, maybe a year. He was ready to wait. Songfa organized a winter feast. It was her idea. She said people needed a holiday, that they couldn't just work and heal, that people sometimes need to eat their fill and laugh for no reason. Daniel didn't argue. 3 large bonfires were lit in the central square. They prepared lizard meat, mushroom broth, flatbreads made from imported grain, the first grain of the year. People ate. They drank a decoction made from sweet roots. They laughed. Children ran between the bonfires. Hana played the zither. No one knew where the zither had come from. Pisyu said he'd found it in the caves, an old one, a broken one. He'd fixed it. Hana took it in her hands. She plucked the strings, and the square fell silent. She played a melody no one had ever heard before, because she had composed it herself. The melody was simple, a few notes, a repeating motif, but there was something in it from this place, from the fog, from the stones, from the river, from the people who were supposed to die but instead are alive. Sunhwa stood by the wall and listened, her arms crossed, her face stony as always, but her eyes were shining. Then they brought the old man. His name was Master Kong, the last of the blacksmiths of the old empire. Sunhwa's people had found him in a distant cave to the west, alone, half blind. His hands were dead from frostbite suffered 30 years ago. His fingers were twisted, they wouldn't straighten. His joints were fused, his nerves were damaged. He couldn't hold a spoon, couldn't button his clothes, couldn't do the one thing he knew how to do and loved: forge. Daniel examined him 3 months ago, and since then, he'd been preparing an elixir, especially for him, personalized. Regeneration of nerve endings in the hands, restoration of joint mobility, partial, not complete. He couldn't promise a miracle, but partial recovery meant the old man would be able to bend his fingers, be able to pick up a hammer, be able to strike, at least once. Daniel approached him in front of everyone, in the square, by the bonfire. 2,000 people were watching. He took out a vial, a small one, dark green. 3 months of work, 32 ingredients, 16 processing steps, 4 failed batches before this one. The 5th one worked. He gave it to the old man. The old man drank it in one gulp, sat down on a rock, waited. Everyone waited. The silence in the square grew thick. A minute, 2, 5. The old man raised his hands, looked at them. His fingers were trembling. Then his right index finger straightened, slowly, with a crack. Then the middle one, then the ring finger. The old man looked at his fingers and held his breath. Left hand, index finger, middle finger. He clenched his fist, unclenched it, clenched it, unclenched it. His fingers obeyed. Not all of them. The little fingers remained curled, but 8 out of 10 fingers worked. He stood up, slowly. They led him to the forge. Songfa had ordered it to be set up in the square beforehand, to stoke the coals, to prepare the iron. She knew. Daniel had told her the plan. The old man approached the anvil. He looked at it, as if at an old friend he hadn't seen in 30 years. He reached out his hand. He touched the iron, cold, rough. Then he took the hammer, heavy. His hands shook from the weight, but they held it. He raised the hammer, brought it down. One blow, precise, ringing. Sparks flew into the darkness. A rivet remained on the anvil. Even, neat. 30 years of muscle memory in a single blow. The old man turned to Daniel. His face was wet. His lips were trembling. He said he could work again, and he sank to his knees. The square was silent. Then someone sniffled. Then someone else. Then everyone was crying. Hana cried, pressing a citrus fruit to her chest. Yuna cried, covering her face with her diary. Soyeon cried silently, standing straight, just as she'd been taught. Bok cried loudly, without restraint. Sonhwa stood by the wall, her face stony, arms crossed, a single tear on her left cheek. She didn't wipe it away, for the first time in her life. That same night, the assassins came, 4 of them, over the eastern slope. While the city was celebrating, they were skilled, professional, black clothing, poisoned blades. Silent. But Sonhwa was better. She set up guards in 3 rings, outer, middle, inner. The assassins got through 2. They were caught at the 3rd. 1 died during the capture, 3 were taken alive. Sonhwa interrogated them, roughly. Daniel wasn't present. He didn't want to be. In the morning, Sonhwa came with the results. The assassins had been sent by Crown Prince Hyunsoo. The order was simple. Kill Hyunjun. No need for the body. The head isn't required. Just kill him. The Crown Prince knew his half-brother was alive. He knew about Hyeongyeong. He knew about the elixirs. And he was afraid. Daniel sat in the lab and listened, quietly, calmly. Then he asked if the assassins were alive. Sonhwa said 2 out of 3. The 3rd didn't survive the interrogation. Daniel said to heal the remaining ones. Sonhwa stared at him. He repeated, heal them, feed them, and let them go, with a message for the Crown Prince. Sonhwa asked what message. Daniel said he would send his brother an elixir, for a stomach ulcer. He knew from Hyunjun's memories that Hyunsoo had suffered from stomach pains since childhood. The court physicians had suppressed the symptoms, but not treated the cause. Because the treatment required ingredients that were unavailable, but Daniel had them. Sonhwa said he was mad, that his brother would send new assassins. Daniel nodded. He said, let him send them. He would cure those ones too. A year and a half, spring. The northern horde crossed the western pass. 3,000 warriors, shamans at the head of the column. They were not heading for the empire. They were heading for the poisonous lands. Rumors of the phantom alchemist reached the horde faster than they reached the capital. The shamans wanted recipes, formulas, the secret of turning poison into power. Their own tinctures made from toxic herbs gave them battle frenzy, but burned the body from the inside out. Horde warriors rarely lived past 40. The shamans knew that somewhere beyond the mist, someone had learned to do it right, and they had come to take it. Sonhwa's scouts spotted them 2 days before they arrived. She raised the alarm in Hyeongyeong. 500 fighters. That was all they had, against 3,000. Primitive weapons, spears, knives, bows made of lizard bones. No armor, no shields, no cavalry. Sonhwa stood on the city wall and looked west. Her face was calm. Her hands didn't tremble. She had fought her whole life. But not against an army. Against bandits. against loners, against beasts. 3,000 trained killers was something else. She turned to Daniel and said they could retreat, go deep into the caves. The horde wouldn't venture into the fog. They'd be afraid. They'd lose the city, but they'd survive. Daniel stood beside her. He looked at the houses they'd spent a year building, at the plantation, at the lab, at the people who, for the first time in their lives, had a roof over their heads. And he shook his head. He said he wouldn't retreat, that he had an idea. Sonhwa asked what it was. He said he needed a day. She said he had 12 hours. He locked himself in the lab with Yuna. 12 hours. No sleep. No breaks. Yuna worked in silence. Her hands flew over the crucibles. She already knew his method as well as her own. He explained the task. He needed a gas, an aerosol, one that, when inhaled, would block the effects of the shaman's potions. The horde shamans drank their toxic potions before battle. The potions stimulated the nervous system. They gave superhuman speed and strength. But the mechanism was crude, stimulation through poisoning. If the potion is neutralized directly in the shaman's blood, he won't receive the boost. And without the boost, the shamans are ordinary people. Old, weak, worn out, not fighters. And without shamans, the horde's warriors lose their command and morale. They believe that shamans are invincible. To see a shaman fall is to see a god die. Daniel knew what to make the gas from: white mushroom extract, a detoxifier, the very same one that cleansed the bodies of Hyeongyeong's inhabitants of accumulated toxins. If sprayed as an aerosol, when inhaled, it would bind the toxins from the shamanic potions in the blood, neutralize them. The problem was delivery, how to spray the gas on the battlefield. Yuna proposed a solution. Qi-active water from a deep spring, when heated, released steam with unusual properties. The steam rose and hung as a dense cloud, lingering for hours without dissipating. If white mushroom extract were dissolved in this water and heated, it would create a cloud of detoxifier, a mist, artificial fog, but not poisonous. Quite the opposite. They made 30 clay vessels, sealed, with wicks, a mixture inside. When the wick is lit, the vessel heats up. The mixture evaporates. A cloud rises. Primitive, unreliable, one-time use. But 30 clouds on the battlefield would form a wall of fog in which the shamans would lose their power. Daniel finished in 10 hours, 2 hours to spare. He left the lab. Sonhwa was waiting. He showed her the vessels, explained. She listened, then she nodded, said it might work or maybe not, but there were no other options anyway. The battle began at dawn. The horde came from the west. The columns stretched across the valley. At the front were the shamans, 12 of them, wearing skull masks, carrying staffs. They drank potions on the march, their eyes filled with blood, their veins bulged. They began to sing, a low rumble that made the earth vibrate. The warriors behind them quickened their pace. Battle frenzy spread like a wave. Sonhwa stood on the wall, waiting. When the column entered the narrow part of the valley, she gave the signal. 30 vessels flew from the walls. The wicks were burning. The vessels shattered on the rocks. White steam rose, thick, dense. A wall of fog rose across the valley. The horde entered it without stopping. They were used to the fog. They were not afraid. The shamans continued to sing. 30 seconds. A minute. The singing grew quieter, more uncertain. The first shaman stopped. He staggered. He clutched his throat. The potion in his blood was breaking down. His strength was fading. In its place came weakness, nausea, pain. The body remembered how old it was and how much poison it had drunk over the years. The second shaman fell to his knees. The third collapsed face first into the mud. The warriors watched. Their invincible shamans were falling like rag dolls. The singing ceased. The roar died down. And in the silence, Sonhwa's cry rang out. Attack! 500 Hyeongyeong fighters struck from 3 sides. from behind the walls, from the flanks, from above, from the cliffs. The horde without shamans was a mob, angry, strong, but without leadership, without battle frenzy, without that inhuman fury that had made them invincible. The battle lasted 4 hours, brutal, bloody. Hyeongyeong lost 83 men, but the horde lost more. 700 killed, 400 wounded. The rest fled. All 12 shamans were captured, alive, but powerless, old, sick, broken. Daniel stood in the square and looked at the captured shamans. They lay in a row, hunchbacked, pitiful. Without their masks and staffs, they were just sick old men poisoned by their own potions. He approached one, the oldest one. The man looked at him with cloudy eyes. Daniel told Yuna to prepare an antidote, for all 12 of them. Yuna asked why. He replied that it was because they, too, were sick. Sanhwa stood nearby, covered in blood, her own and others. She said nothing, but she didn't stop him either. After the battle, the world changed. Not gradually, all at once. Everyone heard of the Northern Horde's defeat at the walls of Hyeongyeong. The horde that had been grinding down the Empire's regular armies was stopped by 500 convicts from the poisonous lands. Without cavalry, without siege engines, without the guild's battle potions, the whisper turned into a scream. The phantom alchemist is real. He is stronger than the guilds. He is stronger than the Empire. And he lives beyond the wall of sorrow. The first to arrive were defectors from the guilds, junior alchemists who were tired of being salaried slaves, who for years had seen nothing but other people's recipes copied 100 times over, who wanted to learn, not serve. 7 of them, in a month. Soyeon led them through the gorge. Daniel received each one personally. He spoke with them. He tested them. Not their knowledge, their motivation. One of the 7 turned out to be a spy for the Southern Guild. Hana heard him whispering something into a communication crystal at night, a small stone hidden in the lining. Sunhwa wanted to kill him. Daniel wouldn't let her. He confiscated the crystal. He spoke with the man. The man confessed. He said his family was being held hostage. Daniel said he understood. He offered a choice: stay, work, and they would rescue the family later. The man wept. He stayed. 6 months later, he became one of the best lab technicians. Next came the 3 small houses, not with armies, with envoys, secret ones, at night, through the gorge. The small houses were the poor outskirts of the empire, without resources, without influence. Their provinces were starving. People were sick. The guilds wouldn't lower their prices. The empire wouldn't help. The envoys brought a proposal. An oath in exchange for elixirs. Not for trade, for supply. Regular, at a fixed price. For hospitals, for soldiers, for peasants. Soyeon led the negotiations. Toughly, exactly. She knew every envoy, knew their weaknesses, knew what they needed. She concluded 3 treaties in a single night. The 3 small houses swore allegiance to Hyeongyeong, not to the empire, not to the guilds, to a city in the poisonous lands. It was the first political act, the first recognition. Hyeongyeong ceased to be a convict camp. It became a power. Between 1 and 2 years, Daniel did 2 things that changed him personally. First, he began a series of injections for Hana, black snake venom, microdoses, once a week. He injected it with the finest needle made of lizard bone into the area behind her ears. That's where the branches of the optic nerve ran. Each injection stimulated the regeneration of nerve fibers, slowly, millimeter by millimeter. A month later, Hana said she could see light, not objects, light, bright and dark. After 3 months, outlines, blurred spots. After 6 months, she could make out faces at arm's length. Daniel didn't rush the process. Every week, he examined her eyes, checked her pupils' reaction, adjusted the dosage. Yuna helped prepare the solution. Master Chan shook his head and muttered that this was beyond alchemy. Daniel said it was beyond his alchemy, not beyond the realm of possibility. Second, Hyunjun's mother. Soyeon found information. through agents, through defectors, through bribed officials. A woman named Lady Yoon was alive, not executed as announced 20 years ago, imprisoned in a monastery prison on an island in Yellow Lake. Crown Prince Hyun-soo knew. He kept her as insurance, in case the Sixth Prince survived and became a problem. A living mother is leverage. Daniel read So-yeon's report and remained silent. His hands didn't tremble. His expression didn't change. But Yuna, who was standing nearby, said later that at that moment, the black veins in his neck bulged so much they were visible through the fabric of his shirt. He said one word: when. So-yeon replied that the plan would be ready in a month. Ashley led the operation. Daniel still hadn't gotten used to her. She appeared in the 4th month, a half-breed, the daughter of a horde shaman and a captive aristocrat, an assassin sent to kill him. 2 matching sabers. Silent. Deadly. She snuck into the lab at night. Daniel wasn't sleeping. He was working on a formula. He saw movement in the corner. He didn't even have time to be scared. She was right there, a blade at his throat. He looked at her hands, and said she had a tremor, a slight one, almost imperceptible, but deadly for an assassin, that her liver was enlarged. You could tell by her belly, that her skin had a yellowish tinge, that she was poisoned, chronically, with shamanic tinctures they'd been feeding her since childhood, that without treatment, she'd die by 28. Ashley froze. The blade didn't move. Daniel said he could cure her, if she put the saber away. She put it away. She stayed. He treated her for 2 months. Detoxification, liver restoration, regeneration of damaged blood vessels. She didn't thank him, didn't speak, just stayed by his side, followed him like a shadow, silently. Once, Yuna asked him if he wasn't scared of the girl with 2 sabers who followed him without taking her eyes off him. Daniel said he was more scared when she wasn't following him. So she's sharpening her sabers. Ashley took Lady Yoon away in a single night. The 3 monastery guards didn't have time to realize what had happened. She didn't kill a single one. She knocked them out, tied them up, took the woman away. She ferried her across the lake, through the borderlands, through the gorge, a 2-week journey. Lady Yoon arrived in Hyeongyeong on a stretcher, sick, emaciated, gray-haired at 45, but alive. Daniel stood at the gate. He watched. The woman who gave birth to this body, Hyungjun's mother, not his mother, but the body's memory remembered the warmth of her hands, the scent, the voice that sang a lullaby through the basement wall. He approached. She looked at him, at the black veins, at the gaunt face, at his eyes, and pulled him close. She asked nothing. She wasn't surprised. She just hugged him, as if she had been waiting. Daniel stood motionless. He wasn't her son, but at that moment, it didn't matter, because she was crying with happiness, and he wasn't crying, but he closed his eyes. Year 3, the final year of this story. Daniel stood on the hill where he had woken up 3 years ago in a wrecked wagon. The hill had changed. The fog had cleared. Over the past 3 years, Hyungwon's laboratories had purified the air within a 100-mile radius. The purple haze was gone. All that remained was the morning mist. Ordinary, like over a river in any normal world. The grass on the hill was green, not black, green. The first green grass in 1,000 years. Daniel looked at it and thought that Professor Park from Yonsei would have appreciated it. Probably. The 2 years following the battle with the Horde had flown by. The expedition to the ruins of the ancient civilization took place at the end of the 2nd year. Daniel led it himself, with Yuna, with Master Chong, with Ashley on guard. The ruins lay deep underground, beneath caves with white mushrooms, stone halls, smooth walls, frescoes on the ceilings, libraries, thousands of stone tablets with formulas, with recipes, with records. Yuna cried without holding back. Master Chong sat on the floor and didn't get up for an hour. Daniel read, slowly. The language was ancient, but Chong translated. The ancient civilization was an alchemical empire, more advanced than the current Shinwol. They had discovered the principle of the unity of poison and medicine 1,000 years before Daniel. But they went further, much further. They learned to alter the very structure of life, to rewrite the body, blood, bones, the brain. They created a new kind of human, stronger, faster, smarter, more perfect. And the seven houses were terrified. They united. They destroyed. They flooded the poisonous lands with toxins. But before their death, the ancient alchemists left a key, a biological key woven into the blood of the imperial dynasty. A gene. A dormant gene. Black blood. It activated only upon contact with the toxins of this land, and it carried a program within it, a call, a mind from another world, from a world where knowledge of poisons had reached the next level. For 1,000 years, the gene waited for a coincidence. The carrier must be alive at the moment of death of a suitable consciousness in another world. A soul toxicologist who fell asleep on the Hyeongyeong Bridge turned out to be that coincidence. Daniel read and remained silent. Yuna asked what was wrong with him. He said that now he knew why he was here, that it wasn't a coincidence, that he had been chosen. 1,000 years ago, the dead had embedded a message in someone else's blood and waited. They had been waiting for him. Yuna took his hand. Her fingers were smudged with ink, as always. She said nothing. She just held on. The fall of the great guilds wasn't caused by war. Daniel didn't want war. He wanted a collapse, an economic one. By the end of the second year, Hyeongyeong was producing elixirs on an industrial scale. 20 laboratories, 120 alchemists, 3,000 units of product per month. The cost price was 10 times lower than the guilds. And one day, Daniel ordered it to be distributed for free. Everything. Through every smuggling channel, through every merchant, through every garrison. The fever elixir that the guilds sold for gold appeared in every market, for free, with a note. The phantom alchemist sends his regards. Prices collapsed within a week. The great guilds tried to buy everything up. They ran out of money. They tried to destroy the supply channels. Soyeon opened 10 new ones. They tried to declare the elixirs counterfeit and poisonous, but too many people had already used them. Too many soldiers were alive thanks to them. Too many mothers had cured their children. The guilds collapsed within 3 months. Not all of them. 2 survived. The ones that managed to reach out to Daniel and ask for an alliance. He accepted. On his terms. Open recipes, fixed prices, access for all. Crown Prince Hyunsu sent an army, 10,000, with his best generals, with combat alchemists. The army reached the Wall of Sorrow and stopped. Because beyond the wall, it wasn't convicts who awaited them. 3 minor houses awaited them with their armies, thousands of defectors from the provinces, and 5,000 Hyeongyeong fighters under Sonhwa's command, armed, supplied with elixirs, healthy, strong. Soyeon stepped out to meet the imperial generals, alone, with the seal of the Han House, with the documents of the 3 houses' oath, with the official proclamation of the creation of the Duchy of Mists, and with a proposal: peace, trade, exchange, or war in which the imperial army would be left without elixirs. Because the guilds that supplied them no longer existed, and the phantom alchemist was supplying the other side. The generals stood and said nothing. Then they turned the army around and left. Crown Prince Hyunsu arrived alone, by himself, without guards, through the gorge. They let him through. He walked through Hyeongyeong and looked at the houses, at the laboratories, at the people, at the green grass, at the clean air, at the children running through the streets. They escorted him to Daniel. He stood in the doorway of the lab. He looked at his stepbrother. Handsome, pale, tired, with dark circles under his eyes, and with his hand pressed to his stomach. The ulcer. It was still tormenting him. He hadn't drunk that elixir. He was afraid of poison. Daniel looked at him. Hyunjun's memory conjured an image. A boy of about 8. He had sneaked up to the basement grate, brought a rice cake, slipped it through the bars, whispered, "I'm sorry I can't do more." Daniel took out a vial, that very one, The one he'd sent with the assassins. The second one. He held it out, said it was for an ulcer, that it wasn't poisoned, that he was just sick, and that Daniel could cure him. That was all he wanted to say. Hyun-soo looked at the vial. His hands were shaking. He took it, opened it, drank it, in one gulp. Not because he believed it, because he was tired. Then he sat down on the floor, right on the stone floor of the lab, and he cried, quietly, like a child who had finally been allowed to cry. Daniel sat down beside him, silently, just as he had once sat beside Soyeon. Presence. Sometimes that's all you can offer. Hyun-soo left the next morning. 3 days later, the news came. The crown prince had taken his own life in his chambers, quietly, at night. He left a 2-line note. He asked for forgiveness, not from Daniel, from the boy to whom he had once brought a rice cake through the bars. Daniel read the note, folded it, put it away, went outside. He stood in the rain for a long time. Then he returned to the lab and worked until morning. The coronation, not in the capital, on the hill where it all began. A glass greenhouse dome built in 6 months. Inside grew herbs from all 7 houses, poisonous and pure, together, without division. 6 women stood beside him, Sonchva in leather armor, a scar across her eyebrow, arms crossed, the eyes of a wolf, but warm. Yuna in an alchemist's robe, crystal spectacles on her forehead, a journal under her arm, fingers stained with ink. Soyeon in silk from the House of Han, back straight, clear eyes. The first to offer him her hand and a title. Ashley behind his left shoulder, 2 sabers at her belt, a silent shadow. Hana in a dress the color of dawn. She saw, clearly, sharply, every snowflake, every face, every color. Eyes that hadn't seen for 17 years now couldn't get enough. And Lady Minji Ro, she was the last to arrive, in her 2nd year. The former chief alchemist of the Eastern Guild, exiled for getting too close to the truth. Cold, sarcastic. She had looked down on Daniel for 3 days. On the 4th, he solved the problem she had been struggling with for 15 years, stabilizing a mercury base through an organic chelate. She was standing next to him now, smiling, for the first time in 20 years, sincerely. Before him was a crowd. Former lepers, former convicts, former peasants, former aristocrats, defectors from the guilds, soldiers, alchemists, blacksmiths, musicians, children. Old Master Kang stood in the front row. His hands were those of a laborer, strong, covered in soot. Master Chan stood beside him. He wept openly. Taesu, Bok, everyone. Daniel did not hold a crown in his hands, a small glass vial, darkened by time, the first elixir he had made in this world, from a black mushroom grown on a corpse, for an old convict coughing up blood in a crevice. 3 years ago, he raised the vial to the sky. A gray sky. No, not gray. For the first time in 1,000 years, the sky above the poisonous lands was clear. He said they had all been banished here to die, that the place where they were sent to die was now a place where they would learn to live. That the Alchemists' Empire was open, its doors to all, including those who had sent them here, because they too would come. They will be sick, and Hyeongyeong will cure them. And at that moment, snow began to fall from the sky, the first real snow in 1,000 years on these lands. Pure, white, without poison, without impurities, without a purple tint, just snow. Hana lifted her face. She saw it. For the first time in her life, she saw snow. White dots against the gray sky. They fell slowly, swirled, landed on her eyelashes, melted on her cheeks. She laughed, ringing, like a child, because inside, she was still a child who had once been told that the world was dark and cruel. But the world turned out to be white and quiet and beautiful. Daniel stood on the hill. Snow fell on his black hair, on the black veins on his arms, on the glass vial. He wasn't smiling. He was just standing there. And he thought that somewhere far away, in another world, on the bridge over the Han River, it was snowing too, and that his mother was probably looking at him through the window, and that she would never know. But he had done what he had always wanted. Not Hyunjun, not the prince. Daniel Shin, a weary Korean scientist who had wanted all his life for the cure to be for everyone. And now, it was for everyone. He closed his eyes. The snow was falling. Hana was laughing. The world was beginning anew.